Well, as we mentioned earlier in the program this week, we've seen a string of government MPs canvassing ideas on superannuation, from abandoning the scheduled increase in how much employers have to contribute to workers' super, to making the whole thing voluntary, at least for low-income earners. Well, the Prime Minister has shot these ideas down, saying the government will stick to its pre-election promises. But that doesn't mean the review of retirement incomes that will soon be held won't be looking at these ideas.
Reviews look at all sorts of things, but that they are reports of reviews, not of the government. And the government responds as appropriate. But I can only refer you again to what the Treasurer said yesterday about our plans and what the Finance Minister has said about our plans, and indeed what I said about our plans on this topic.
So the review can look at whatever it likes, but the government won't necessarily be adopting these sort of recommendations. So what's the point of this inquiry? And are the ideas being promoted by government backbenchers this week actually worthwhile? Well, Jeremy Cooper chaired the review of superannuation 10 years ago for the Rudd government. He's now Retirement Income's chairman at Challenger. Joins me now. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon, Jeremy Cooper. Let's start with Andrew Bragg's idea that you'd make super voluntary for those earning up to $50,000. Specifically, he's saying you'd still pay it, but at the end of the financial year, when you put your tax return in, you could tick a box and say, no thanks, I'd rather have that money back in my bank account right now than in my superannuation account. What do you think of that idea?
Well, look, it's always good, you know, in the lead up to a review and in a first speech of a new senator, it's always it's perfectly legitimate to throw out these sort of ideas. And of course, we haven't seen the detail, but the kind of initial thoughts I have are that you're potentially creating two different classes of citizen. You know, people who are compelled to be in super, and then those below a certain income level who have the option. And I was particularly concerned about the effect that it might have on women who have a hard enough time often with broken work patterns and supporting children and so on. And because super's work-based, they've got a pretty hard time already in building up sufficient retirement savings. So there's the females issue. Then there's the issue that you don't always stay at particular income bands. You tend to move around through your career. There's sort of a U-shape where you start off modestly, you build up, and then maybe as you get older, you start coming back down again. And so how would the threshold, you know, it might be a bit bouncy as people sort of move in and out of the income threshold. But look, we'll see. We might get more details on it, and if it gets considered by the review, we'll see what happens.
Well, look, it's a good point about those women in particular who would be adversely affected by this, given they're probably the ones that make up the bulk of that income demographic. I suppose those arguing for this or for not proceeding with the increase in the compulsory superannuation guarantee would be that putting the money directly into the worker's pocket means they can invest in a house or whatever they choose, really, that they might be better off over the course of their working life if they could invest that money themselves right away or access that money right away. As you know, the Grattan Institute's also looked at this and found you'd be better off sticking with 9.5% superannuation rather than going to 12. Does that analysis hold up, do you think?
Well, I suppose what we need to remember is that it's a single, that there are no individualised SG rates. It's a single figure and it is compulsory. So while it probably suits the mass middle, I think where these ideas are coming from is that people at the low end of the income scale might be better off actually having the money in their pocket. But the minute you do that, you've sort of broken the all-in collective model. I think one of the good things about super is that everybody's in it, whether you like it or not. And we've had a quarter of a century or more of that, and so people have got pretty used to it. If you start breaking that model, I just wonder where we're headed. As for the need to go from 9.5 to 12, look, that really is a political question. What I will say is what we're seeing now is just how profound the move to 9% was all the way back in 2002. We're now really seeing the power of the compounding returns from that time. So even if we did move up to 2012 as planned, and the government's been very clear that it's not deviating from that time schedule, the sort of people who are going to benefit from that are probably under 40. So by the time those compounding returns really start hitting people's superannuation accounts, we'll be well out into the mid-2030s. So it's not going to be an immediate kapow sort of an impact. It will be quite long-term, just as the 2002 increase is really starting to have an impact now.
Well, that's an interesting point because, you know, it's true, isn't it, that average retirements right now, average retirement savings aren't enough for the comfortable retirement. You're saying we will see that, even if we stuck at 9.5%, over time we will see, through compounding interest, those savings really start to climb.
Yeah. So at the moment, we're saying that a typical household couple, so we look at superannuation because around 70% of people start retirement as in some sort of financial couple. We try and build a household model to look at this, and we're saying that the typical couple these days, just on the eve of retirement, have got about $400,000 in super. Now, they'll be assisted by the age pension at that level, and as the system fully matures, that number will go up to something more like $600,000 in today's dollars, which gets you very close, on a couple basis, gets you very close to the sort of numbers that ASFA are using to articulate what a couple need for a comfortable retirement.
Look, the Prime Minister's ruled out a number of things when it comes to these sort of changes. The review that's coming might look at it, but what is left and what should be the focus of this retirement incomes review? We've seen a lot of reviews, yours, the Murray review, the Productivity Commission review. This one's about to be held. What would be the 2 or 3 things that really need tackling right now?
Well, you know, it's not for me to dictate to the government, but I'll have a go at what could form part of the review. One thing that could happen is that some of the Productivity Commission's ideas could be more thoroughly examined. For example, the best in show idea that's out there, and some of the other things that are pretty contentious coming out of what was a pretty big piece of work. Let's not forget the Productivity Commission spent 3 years in various phases looking at this, so that there would be that. There's then the purpose of superannuation bill, the 2016 bill that didn't make it all the way through Parliament. There's some pretty important ideas in there. There's then a question that keeps coming up, and that is the role of the family home vis-a-vis the age pension means tests. Now, we saw the Labor Party, I suppose, handed its front teeth in the election for daring to suggest that refundable franking credits be put an end to. So it would be a pretty bold government that would actually move forward on making the age pension, making the family home accessible in some part in the age pension, but it's certainly something that could be looked at. And then lastly, possibly a go at a sort of government view on what adequacy looks like in super. So I mentioned earlier in passing that the ASFA, the Association of Super Funds, has a figure for singles and couples. Let's just take the couple one. It says that with today's sort of market assumptions and discount rates and so on, that a couple would need $640,000 to have a comfortable retirement. Now, you know, that assumes still a relatively risk-based asset mix and so on, and there really isn't a comparable official government figure on just how much super is adequate, and then you could build some policy ideas around that sort of adequacy framework. So there's some pretty
well, that's a pretty comprehensive list now that you run through it there, Jeremy Cooper, from transparency to, you know, setting an actual figure from the government, at least, of what a comfortable retirement would be, and the purpose of superannuation as well. Look, we've got to go, but thank you very much for that. Perhaps we'll talk again as they do get underway into this next review of retirement incomes. Appreciate your time.